I was saying, I admit on that part, I know it can be really anxious for students as to how to balance and manage and all of that. But the key to it is to like pick up topics and pick up elective subjects which actually help you in your CLAT preparation. And like Anu was saying, like even the CLAT exam, we need to like look at the long comprehensions, read it, and all of it. And most of the times, I think, be it during your preparation times or while you're attempting the exam, one of the major hindrances is the kind of anxiety you have, right? Whenever you're writing an
Hello everyone, I'm Surbhi, the founder of LegalWiki, your go-to source for legal education and inspiration. Here we engage with the top professionals across the legal industry to bring you valuable insights. I welcome everyone to our 21st episode of this podcast series. Today, we are conducting a joint panel with two special guests who have completed their LLM from NLSIU Bangalore, India's top national law school. Both of them are gold medalists for the batches of 2022 and 2024 and now have taken different career paths. I welcome you both to this podcast. Let me start by giving a brief introduction about today's guest. I'll start with Ms. Anu. Ms. Anu is currently working as a young professional at the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, and pursuing her PhD from Jindal Global Law School. She has been a guest assistant professor at Delhi University and also been a part of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. She completed her LLM from NLSIU in 2022 and secured rank 27 in her CLAT PG exam, where she was awarded a gold medal for her outstanding academic performance. She has also cleared UCG NET exam. Now, if I talk about Amulya, she's a first generation lawyer currently practicing before the Karnataka High Court. She specializes in dispute resolution, commercial litigation, and white collar crime defense. She has been an award winning social activist since her early teen years. Literature is a forte. She has authored two books so far, and she has also served as a surgeon in National Cadet Corps. She completed her LLM from NLSIU in year 2024, where she was awarded a gold medal for best dissertation. Now let's come back to today's podcast. The focus of this podcast is to discuss the strategy for the CLAT PG exam, the journey of being at NLSIU, career option it opens up, and whether pursuing an LLM is the right choice for aspiring law graduates or legal professionals. A warm welcome, Anu and Amulya. How have you been?
Thank you, Subi. I've been well.
Great, great. What about you, Anu?
Thank you, Surbhi, for that great introduction. I know we have worked together before as well, and I've been good also. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, same here. So let's get started. Excited to have this conversation with you. And I just want to help out the LLM aspirants because the exam is also coming. Great. So, like CLAT consortium seems to have changed their exam pattern a lot. And from my time to this pattern has changed a lot. But, like from the year 2021, pattern remains the same. So, Amulya, could you share your strategy for the exam and also what candidates should focus on for this last 15 days?
So my strategy was very simple. I just focused on reading Bear Acts. I think Bear Acts are very important, and especially the illustrations you have in the Bear Acts, just focus on that before you jump into any secondary reading material. And second, most important thing is to read judgments. That helped me a lot. I used to read the entire judgments recently, the recent ones, and especially the ones which got popular on the social media. Or these days, you also have websites like Live Law, which tell you what is happening around the world, right? Around the country's legal jurisprudence. So two key things I would say is like get your bare acts right, know your basics, read up the illustrations in them and read the judgments as a whole. So most of these CLAT coaching institutes give you a summary of the judgments, and I would say that's just a shortcut method. So read the entire judgment because especially with my batch when I wrote my CLAT PG exam in December 2022, that was for the academic year 2023 and 2024. The paper was also based on your ability to, read long passages in a short period of time, and if you could grasp and extract the legal principle out of it. So, reading judgments would help you do that. And coming to the second part of the question about the tips for the last 15 days, I would say just revise. Go through the mock sample papers you have on the CLAT official website itself, because that will give you a lot of idea on what kind of questions will be asked. So with my case, I hadn't spent much time on jurisprudence, and when I saw the sample papers, I realized that it's all going to be application based. Like you just have to read the paragraph, understand what it says, and then apply it. So you get to know a lot of patterns like that. So last 15 days, I would say like just do the official mock sample papers first and do your revision on the basis of it. Try not to just panic and get anxious and, just take in a lot of material towards the end.
Correct. So, Anu, could you share your strategy for the exam and what candidates should focus on the last 15 days?
Yes. So even to be very honest, when I was preparing for my CLAT PG, I appeared for my PG exam right after my graduation. So I graduated in 21. And in our undergrad also we had to submit a dissertation. So I submitted my dissertation by mid-June and the exam was somewhere around late July. So that was the only time I got for preparation. Not to say that you are supposed to prepare only for 1 month, but since I had already been reading judgments that were coming out, so it was easy for me to navigate that way. But what I can tell you is there is still enough time if you are aiming for a good score and a good college to get into for LLM, there's still enough time for you, considering or keeping in mind that you already know the basics of law, you are already in touch with the judgments, even if not in entirety, you are in touch with judgments that have come out, what is the new rule of law that has been laid down. And exactly like Amulya said, it only benefits you when you have read the entirety of the judgment, or at least when you are aware of what all the opinions are and the basis of those opinions, because they are not just gonna ask you which judgment held this and this, or which judgment it was held that right to privacy is a fundamental right, because each and every one would know that. Anybody who is even on Instagram, I would say, would know that, because nowadays we get a lot of our news from Instagram. But a little bit in-depth understanding of the legal concepts. And also for the last time, I would say what you can do is, like she said, Live Law is one good source. There is Supreme Court Observer, that's another good resource for you to revise. They also give really good in-depth explanations. In fact, I think one of the contributors for that are professors from NLSIU itself. So it's like very trusted, good analysis, good summaries you will get there. And recently, the Supreme Court has also started providing judgment summaries on their website. So that is just an added bonus. Last time, you can just go and read all the last minute, 2024, all the 2024 judgment summaries. So that will give you an edge. Even if maybe you have missed out on one judgment, if you remember the name, the bench, the ratio, the dissenting opinion, that would give you a lot of insight. And if you know a lot of other things, like she said, it's all application based. If you're able to comprehend and if you have some backdrop of legal knowledge, by elimination you might be able to get the correct answer. Because also you mentioned that the pattern changed in 2020 itself. So since 2020, it's very much, it does not require you to memorize stuff. It does not require you to know what section, what subsection the things are at, but what it says, what is the essence of the thing. And the second thing that helped me is, if you are subscribing to a newspaper, maybe the Indian Express or the Hindu, so the editorial, which is a little legal inclined, try to read that in record time. So if you see that, you will be able to assess what your reading speed is. Because a lot of my students as well as my friends who appear for this examination, they tell me that they could not finish the paper. They knew the answers, but they couldn't finish the paper, because in all they will give you 120 questions, but that can be divided into 10 passages also, 12 passages also, 20 passages also. 20 into 6 they will do. That's what they did when I gave the exam. So the number of passages increased, so you have to read more in the same amount of time. And questions, it won't take you time to answer questions, but based on the passage, answering like that comprehension ability is key. So read the editorials that are in the newspaper and time yourself. How much time do you take reading it? And if you're able to understand what is given in record time, that will help you, I think.
So, is there any ideal time they should give for one passage?
So if see, I'll tell you with respect to 2021 paper. So the passages were this big. I would say
Around, I
10
think,
sentence.
450 words. Uh,
Perfect. Yeah. So
huh.
that should not take you, first reading should not take you more than 2 minutes. And if sometimes like there was this question actually 2021 paper which was company law based, and all the questions, I keep giving this example everywhere because I did not revise company law, but if you read the passage carefully, you'll be able to answer all 6 questions. So in 2 minutes maybe you'll be able to read quickly, but maximum 3 to 4 minutes it should give you to comprehend, and after that you in 1 minute you have to solve all the 6 questions that follow, or all the 5 questions that follow. So take as much time as you need in reading the passage, but you have to mark your questions really quickly because only a limited time is given there.
Correct. When I was preparing for my exam, the pattern was a bit different, but I used to follow SEC newsletter. That was actually very helpful for me because they also list out all the landmark cases and the recent cases with the judge's name and everything. So that can also, I think, it will help them out. Okay.
Yes. Subscribing to the SEC newsletter, it will just come to your email. So you
Huh,
don't even have to go
exactly.
anywhere.
Huh. I
Every
used to
morning
make
you can
notes
just,
from that actually because through email I used to get notification.
yeah.
So yeah. So now, as exam is conducted in the month of December, it's very difficult to manage with your studies. So how did you guys manage your college and exam preparation both at the same time? What was your strategy?
I think in my case, I think personally feel it was a good thing. Like, mine was the first batch. The exam was conducted in December. We were just already halfway through our final year, and initially I was also a little laid back, thinking, okay, it's gonna be in May, June, we will see, and then all of a sudden they make an announcement and put it in December. But I think there are certain pros to it. One is that you are in touch with the subject. And in most of the law schools, your final semester is a little light comparatively. You don't have like heavy core courses. It's majorly assignments, projects, or a lot of time for your internships. So in that sense, I would say like it's easier because you're in touch with that academic rigor which you usually undergo in a law school. So you don't have to do anything entirely different. And having said that, so I think having the exam in December is also a little peaceful in a way, like you get your time, you get a lot of time to prepare for your final semester exams, sorry, later. And you also have time to continue your internships in your final semester. So one part of it is already gone. It's not all of them coming together, like, okay, where do I join? Job interviews for other law schools, internships, everything. It's not all of them together. So I think December, now that we all know that the exam is going to be conducted in December itself, whoever is planning to attempt or write the CLAT PG exam can actually plan their schedule in that way. So for me, it was like that. So when I wanted to give my CLAT PG in my final ninth and 10th semester, we basically had a system of electives. And I chose electives which are a little more mainstream, connected with the CLAT PG subjects like, constitutional comparison law or comparative criminal law, which gives you an idea of CRPC and all of it together. So I think that is how I navigated it. And even when I picked up my assignment topics, I would be like, okay, I'm just going to look at the judicial trend of the judgments relating to this particular law towards the end. So I think that's the key. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem right now, and I'm pretty sure a lot of law schools are in fact supportive when you tell them like you want to like go and write CLAT PG. And the other thing is like you also have accessibility to your professors. So in case you have some doubts and all of it, you can still approach them, talk to them about it. You can also do peer learning because you're still in college. Because all of this I feel is like very difficult once you start working or you take a career break, then you decide to write an competitive exam and get back to academics. So it's easier to do in the flow.
Correct. Like you explained it really well that how you can easily manage the time. But for most of these students, it's actually very difficult. They panic a lot because in December they have their semester exam also. So it's get very difficult for them to manage this CLAT PG also because they also consider this to be an option that after CLAT UG they want to do the PG exam again. Otherwise, they'll have to take a break or they won't be getting the job. So their 1 year will get wasted. So all of the things which goes around. Okay. So
Yes, Yeah, so I was saying I admit on that part, I know it can be really anxious for students as to how to balance and manage and all of that, but the key to it is to like pick up topics and pick up elective subjects which actually help you in your CLAT preparation. And like Anu was saying, like we even the CLAT exam, we need to like look at the long comprehensions, read it, and all of it. And most of the times, I think be it during your preparation times or while you're attempting the exam, one of the major hindrances is the kind of anxiety you have, right? Whenever you're writing an exam. I think so. I had questions related to Factories Act in my question paper, and that is something I totally did not know. So the moment I saw the paper for 2 seconds, even I froze. I was like, okay, what is this? Because for me, like 10 questions were based on each paragraph. But then when you get a lot more calmer, read the paper, you understand that okay, most of the answers are actually here. So I think having that calm and composed approach to exams also really helps. And that is something you can do with having a daily discipline routine wherein you're like you give this amount of time to everything. And also your mock test because they give you exposure of how the exam environment is going to be and also give you some amount of confidence when you see your scores going up in your mock test. So I think that is also one way to approach both of this.
And I think that's the key to have a proper routine. Yes. So, did you face any challenges while you are preparing for the exam? So, Anu,
Yes, I think Anu can pick this up. I'll just add to her
Yeah.
later.
So as I mean, I did not have much time to completely dedicate, so I had like about 40 days to prepare for this exam. But I remember I did enroll in one test series because everybody kept saying that, this is a new pattern and you need to practice. And I remember I gave a test, and the first test I scored really well. So I was like, okay, even if I'm not prepared, I'm scoring a good score. And the second test I gave was so, I mean, the scores declined like anything. So after that, I just stopped attempting any tests. But at that time the situation was different because this new pattern had only been implemented once. And if you see the 2020 paper, that is much tougher than everything that came after. I think rank 1, whoever got rank 1 in 2020 had some 72 marks, and that was rank 1. So after that, and I think my marks were higher than that, and my rank was 27 the next year, and I think it kept increasing from there on. So the mock tests at the time were designed according to that 2020 pattern. I remember there was this question in 2020 paper, which was, I think, right to privacy judgment and one book which one of the judges quoted. And they were like, what book is this from? So, even if you read the entire judgment, there's a very less probability that you would remember unless it's some famous book like Annihilation of Caste by Dr. Ambedkar or something like that. So, because we know that this is a book that gets cited a lot, so you might mark it, but you can as well be wrong. You can completely be wrong in guessing that. So, that was the level of question paper in 2020. Some questions were extremely typical, and one would, I mean, I was just thinking, how is one supposed to answer these questions? I cannot by heart all the judgments. I know the legal concepts, but how am I supposed to how am I supposed to know the books that they are referring to? Because that's very hard. One judgment refers to, I don't know, 100 books maybe, and 200 cases. So one cannot remember all that. But then I saw the score and I was like, okay, so they're not expecting you to score 100 plus in such a tough paper. So it's all proportional. It's never like the paper is too tough, but somebody is scoring 100, If the paper would be tough, the cutoff would be some 80, 70, 60, something like this. And if the paper gets easier, you are expected to score higher marks. So it is also a presence of mind thing during the exam. You have to sort of deduce if you are supposed to mark these many questions, because going in the exam, I thought, okay, 70 is a good score, 72 is a good score. But when I read the paper, it seemed like questions were quite predictable. The Arnab Goswami bail judgment was there. The Hindu law judgment was there. Hindu Succession Act recent judgment, which talked about the right of a daughter to be a co-partner even before 2005. All of that was there, and it was very very famous judgments. And the questions were also quite relatively easier, I would say. So I thought, no, if I attempt some 90 questions here, I don't think, because I am very bad at accuracy, I would say. Unless I attempt a lot of questions, I cannot expect good marks. There are some people who would maybe attempt 90 and get 85 correct. So if I attempt 110, maybe I'll get 95 correct. That's the kind of accuracy that I have usually seen for MCQs that I have. I'm good at descriptive. So since this is not a descriptive exam, so you also have to assess the accuracy that you have and attempt questions accordingly. So since I did not have a lot of time, I did not have a lot of apprehension, but I remember that analyzing question papers helps you a lot, not just 2020, and even before that, if you go, you would see certain themes that the examiners want you to know, like the 42nd Amendment, 44th Amendment. Constitution is a core subject, international law is a core subject. So I did not study any criminal law before because I did not have the time. But I had studied criminal law well in my third and fourth year when they were teaching me in college. So that way it becomes easier. CLAT exam is not something, you can just, there's no formula. You cannot be reading 500, 600 judgments in even a year of time. But in the final year, like Amulya said, you are a bit relaxed because there is not very CRPC, CPC, all of these is already done. You have attempted the exams. For us, we had dissertation that was a little hectic, internships and moot courts. And also, like she said, peer studying is a very important aspect when you prepare for exams during college. It is very difficult once you graduate and you start working, especially once you start making money, studying becomes very difficult. That's what I can say from personal experience. So I think Amulya also gave exam in a continuation, and so did I. I was a student already. I was in the academic rigor, as you call it, and it was easy because we were studying and we just studied for a little bit more, like 6 months more, or in the middle of our course. So I think it is better that they are taking it in December. Now that people know that, okay, this is going to happen in December, you can plan out your things also accordingly. July, they will take new batches starting July, August, I think. That's when the new batch starts. So you have enough time to also decide. Some people want to do for an LLM. Some people do not want to do it from NLUs. They want, depending on the specialization, they want to do it from some other college. So it gives you enough space to make decisions and also be prepared in advance.
Correct. So Amulya, would you like to add further to this? Any challenges you have faced?
Yes, for me, like the major challenge, I wouldn't say it was a challenge, it was just unexpected that they would prepone the exams and make it in December. But like Anu said, I think it's a good thing that they did so because you don't have to suffer a year loss, right? Like hypothetically, okay, you did not get the desired college in your CLAT PG, you still have that buffer time of like the 5 to 6 months, which is your final 10 semester to actually decide what to do. So you're prevented from having a year loss because you're already, even before you finish your graduation, you already know if you have a PG seat or not with respect to CLAT. So in that sense, I think it helps you, like she said, like it helps you make a lot of decisions. And yes, personally for me, like I didn't find it very difficult because the place where I did my undergraduation from, I think the teaching staff there were extremely supportive. We had resources, like the library was good. We had subscriptions to Live Law and all of it. So on the whole, it was pretty smooth for me.
Good. So, apart from CLAT PG examination, any other exam they should focus on to have like just a backup option?
So for people who are exclusively looking to do their masters, there is CLAT, there is IELTS, and I think a few of other private college exams are there. I think Jindal has its own exam and Symbiosis have their own exam. So these are the options for masters. But if you don't want to go for a masters, you could directly look for placement. Or I think most people in my batch at NLS, I mean, they were not preparing for CLAT PG, they were preparing for judiciary. So once you prepare for like a more difficult exam, CLAT PG becomes easier, and like they all sail through easily. So they all got through, and judiciary does take a lot of time. So they thought, I would just spend 1 year here, and everybody thought it was going to be really easy because LLM is supposed to be for a year, but analysis is a little rigorous. But a lot of my classmates are now judges, so I would say depending on your long-term career goal, you have to make your choices. Because I somehow, some way or the other, I wanted to get into research and academics, so I thought no matter what, I have to get into one of these decent colleges so that I can pursue my academic career further. So I remember I had filled the IELTS form as well, and I was going to fill the ILI form. ILI is also a great institute for LLM. So CLAT happened first. At that time, it was happening in July only, and within 2 days they gave the result. So I was just looking at expected cutoffs and everything. So I was pretty much 99% sure that I would get through NLS. So if you don't get NLS, the next best option is NLU Delhi. So I was just contemplating if to go for my IELTS exam or not. But just a day before that exam, results came out, the rank came out. So I was pretty sure, okay, there's no need to give. But for someone who is not sure if LLM is the only thing that they want to do, or maybe they would want to start practicing, if somebody wants to start practicing, there is no need to, plan anything other than the fact that they have to choose the forum where they want to practice. Like Amulya is practicing at the High Court. Many people want to start their practice at the High Court level. Many people want to do a criminal or a civil law litigation at the subordinate court level. So that is one option. Another option, UGC you cannot do before UGC net, you can't do before enrolling in a master. So that's not an option at that stage. Other thing is preparing for judiciary. That is also what a lot of people these days choose to do because it's a good, safe, stable career option. And the third thing is, I think, law firm placements. So that involves a lot of factors. That also takes into account what college you have done your undergrad from and how many internships you have done and from where. So depending on what is your CV like in the 5th year, you have to make an informed choice. Okay, this is what I'm going to pursue, and then make decisions accordingly. And I think a lot of people just give CLAT PG as a backup option. So if their whole profile is not, very research like, it becomes difficult for them. People who have just done corporate internships would probably not be in touch with constitutional law judgments as much as maybe people like her and I were, because we were, very much into this. Like she said, our electives were also constitutional law and criminal law and I'd say jurisprudence based. And like she said, she also chose the same thing. So it depends on a lot. It depends on a lot on your background and your profile and your long-term goal.
Great. So let's move on to the second part of this podcast. So, many law students are confused whether they should pursue an LLM immediately after graduation or after gaining some years of experience. As I think you both have mentioned that after doing LLM just after college is easy because once you start earning, it's get very difficult to focus on your study, right? So now, Anu, I think now you're having more than 2 years of experience. So what's your thought on this? That it's good to pursue LLM after college only, or you should take a break, you should gain some practical experience or knowledge, and then decide in which area of law you should do the specialization. So have you thought about this?
Yes. So like you said, if you are looking to go for a particular area of law, having some experience does help you in choosing your specialization area. But again, from my personal experience and observations, I'd say that if you're choosing to do an LLM in India, it's better to do it continuously. And if you're planning to go outside abroad, so work for 1 or 2 years and then go. Because what I've seen is in India, the entrance exams are very academic based. So you have to be in touch with studying, reading, writing, research, all of that. But when you go to, say, London or even the US, in fact, they ask for 1 or 2 years of experience, and they will not take any entrance tests as such, but they will look at your work profile and what you have done, extracurriculars during college and all of that. So depending on, so if you want a particular, if you have a particular choice that, okay, I want to do it from India, I would say just do it and get it over with. Because what I've realized is a lot of jobs these days consider LLM as a 1 year PQE, also post qualification experience. And a lot of, like where I work, Ministry of Finance, and a lot of government advisory roles, the minimum requirement is also having an LLM. So that has also become sort of an entry barrier. Not so much in corporate law, I would say. Law firms do not care if you have an LLM or not. So if you want to go that way, you can just, take a break and try working for 1 or 2 years in a law firm. But for any other field of law, I would just say if you are planning to do it in India itself, it's better to do it altogether. And because it also becomes a little difficult. I mean, it also depends from person to person, if a person can choose or afford to take a break in their career and, stop working and focus 1 or 2 years in academics. So that is a very personal choice, I would say. But at least if you plan to go abroad, I would say gain some experience inside, choose your particular specialization, and then go. That will benefit you when if you choose to come back, and even during your time in the college, wherever you go to.
Right. So, Amalya, what's your thought on this and how it is helping in your career?
So, this was actually a dilemma which I personally faced. Like, okay, I had finished my CLAT, I had the seat now, and then I was like, okay, now what should I just take this up, or should I work first and then, and then come back to masters? But I think it depends on what you really want to do, right? When you're finishing your undergrad, like if you always wanted to be into academia and if you wanted to be a professor, there's no point in even thinking about like should you be doing the masters now or not, because that's the only option you have. And for people who want to get into like exam preparations like judiciary or civil services, then LLM is the safest option, like you have a buffer time because you get like those 1 or 2 years of time period wherein you're not really working, but you're also doing something in parallel apart from just preparing for your exams. So I think these are the also kind of options which you really need to consider while choosing or deciding that if you should do your masters now or not. And especially if you have a seat, I think just finish it off because masters at NLS, NALSA, and all is like barely 11 months and it just goes. And these days, if you want to be in practice, also 11 months is technically the time period wherein you need to finish all the processes, getting enrolled in the bar council, writing your AIB, waiting for its results to come out and all of it. So you can actually like just finish off your masters in India if you're waiting for all these processes to happen at the same time. And also, the way I look at it is like, if you really want to do a master's, you can always do another one later also. Like you can just finish it off now once in the flow, and later if you think like if your career allows you to have a mid-career master's abroad or from a better university, then why not? There's no hard and fast rule about it. And when I used to have conversations about these with like I personally wanted to always practice litigation. So when I used to have that conversation, and my seniors always told me like, if especially you want to be in litigation, it's better that you finish it off because once you start practicing and then you have to take a break from your court appearances, your matters get listed, it becomes a slightly difficult task to just juggle around. And your court appearances also reduce. So your familiarity with the courtroom procedures also kind of, suffer a little. So from a practicing advocate, I was always advised to finish off my master's now itself and probably think about it quite a few years down the lane if I want to do a different master's or not. That is like good 7 8 years, not just 2 3 years. Because I was always told like if you just practice for 2 years, then you vanish for another 1 year and come back. It's almost like you'll have to start from the scratch. And also by then you'll have a lot of cases, so you'll have to hand it over to somebody else if you can't juggle it around and stuff. So I think it's better for one to decide like what you immediately want to do at least, and then see if it fits into it. And yeah, just finish off your master's when it's only 11 months and not 2 years. So that was also one of the aspects for me.
In fact, it's just 9 months, I'd say. Like we started in August and finished by April, mid-May.
Yeah, the
Not a lot of.
academic months you give to it is just 9 because 1 month is a break between each trimester. So
And the
it'll actually
trimester
just
system
fly
also,
by.
yeah, it makes you feel like you are there for 2 years, the trimester system, but actually you are barely there for 1 year. And it's just, yeah, if you're doing it from a 1 year institute, you might as well, just finish it off. I agree completely.
And for like practicing advocates, the BCI has also given the relief that it will be considered your experience only and it will not be considered to be a career break. And you rightly said that it depends upon the which career you want to choose in future. But like for example, law firm, they don't require the element of like LLM. But when it comes to other sort of field you want to enter into, it depends. It totally depends on you that you want to do it in a continuous or later on you want to do it. Yes, sir. Um, I think we can
Yeah,
join
so
the
just
other.
to,
You
yeah,
can
and,
have
and
it
just
and then
adding on, I think the best. Yeah, the best part about masters is I think you can also keep in touch with the profession because I still had people who were, also working with chambers and with senior advocates when you were doing your masters. So although you're studying, you're not entirely, separated from the actual work that goes into it. Most of them who come to masters are already enrolled as advocates. So you can also like, keep that minimal touch which you need to keep with your work life. And with NLS especially, you also have a lot of clinical courses which are more practical oriented. So I think it's not going to be entirely academic also, if you look at it that way. So it's a good choice either ways.
I think I will also like to add one more point. It's also good that if you gain a practical exposure and then go for LLM, for example, you want to enter into academics. Okay. So it's better that you are gaining like 1 or 2 years of experience, completing your UG, get like 2 to 3 years of experience, and then go for academic, do your LLM, and then go for academic. This will also give you a wider perspective when you are teaching. This is my like I think personal opinion. This can also work.
Yes, you're right. Because when I went to teach, I mean, there's an impression that, you are very young and the student, in fact, I was teaching at DU. So the students are all already graduates. There's just the three-year LLB program. So they also expect you to, validate yourself. How are you eligible to teach us? What have you done? I mean, they would not say it, but there's always a vibe in the classroom, in the staff room, everywhere. So my work at Ministry of Environment really helped me teach environment law. So you are right in that perspective also, that at least before or after you have to gain experience before getting into teaching. They'll not directly allow you to teach in a university in academics, right? So I was just saying that even during my LLM, like Amulya said, you don't have to be completely cut off from your industry as such, like the legal industry. While I was pursuing my LLM, I was also working with Loctopus and I was writing articles, research articles for them. So that was a paid gig itself, but it did not demand a lot of my time, just a few hours per week. And you can just do that. You can just keep in touch, right? I mean, depending on what you want to do, you can just be maybe working with an advocate. Freelancing with an advocate, doing some drafting matters, not as a professional advocate, obviously on record, but you can still be working. You can keep in touch, and that is the time, a great time also to make connections. In our class, there were very highly experienced people as well who were doing LLM very later on in life. So we got to learn a lot from them also. We got a lot of professional leads as well from those classmates. And yeah, so that is another aspect of doing your LLM. It's not a complete cut off from your work life. You can use it to, I mean, you can leverage it to make industry connections as well.
Right, right. Okay. So let's move further. Like from my time to your time, endless IU has changed a lot. Even like a lot of professors have been changed now. New things have been introduced. Syllabus has been modified. They have added different specialization. In my time, there were only 2 specialization. Now I can say there are 4 specialization they have introduced. So now, Amulya, as you have passed out like from NLSIU this year, can you share your experience of being in NLSIU? Like that's India's top national law school. How was the feeling about the placement cells? So they do have like placement cell there. Then faculties, libraries, what's the curriculum? And I'm sure the trimester, it's really hectic. So how did you manage the things there?
Yeah, so first off, previously NLS used to offer you two specialization streams. I think humanitarian laws and the other is business and commercial laws. But when I did my master's, that is for academic year 2023 to 2024, they did not have a concept of specialization. So the LLM we got is a general LLM, but then you have a system of electives wherein you get to choose. You just have like around 4 or 5 core courses, and the remaining subjects are electives. So you can always like choose your electives in a manner which aligns with what specialization you would have wanted to pursue, right? But the degree itself is not offered as a specialized degree. Like it's not like LLM and so and so. It's just a general LLM. So the first day, I think when I stepped into NLS, like I remember being told like it's easier to get into NLS than it is to get out of NLS. And I think that's one statement I would still remember. But you eventually get with the flow, into the flow, because it's not just you who's dealing with the entire semester, it's the entire batch which is dealing with the trimester system. So the first trimester was a little difficult because NLS has a concept wherein you have to pre-read into the class. If you don't go without reading your reading materials, then you won't be able to actively engage yourself in the classrooms. But I think that practice, although it felt a little too hectic in the first month of my master's, I feel like it was a good practice because towards the end, when you're writing your final exams, it's not like a dump of things on you. You already know what it is. You have some basic idea about how the subject is, what reading materials you need to do, and all of it. So, yeah, I think you'll get into the flow, and eventually it gets a lot easier because you learn how to navigate it. So in that ways, I think it's only the experience which will help you navigate. And also, like I said, it's the entire batch going through it. So you have a lot of support from your peers. So especially my batch, I think we were pretty supportive from each other. We used to make collective notes. One person used to take one reading, put it all on Google Docs, make short notes so that even if somebody wasn't able to read the entire article or an entire reading, you can still go through those short points and read it. So I think that was also very important and very crucial in sailing through NLS.
Okay. Anu, would you like to add anything to this?
That is exactly what I wanted to say as well. Even in my time, there was no specialization offered, but it was up to you to, curate your electives in a manner that would reflect the kind of work you want to do or the kind of specialization that you want to reflect from your entire portfolio. And I remember there were really good courses that were being offered. In fact, my dissertation was on citizenship laws, and in the last semester, in the last trimester, there was a course offered on citizenship, exactly the work that I was intending to do. So it was I mean, the 40 hours, especially, in fact, I got with the subject of my choice. So it was great. I got to engage with the professor. I told her that, my thesis is also on this subject. And she also helped me through a lot of reading. She gave me a lot of, she was practicing, in fact, in that area of citizenship laws in Assam. So she gave me a lot of insight. She put me in touch with a lot of resources that helped me complete my thesis in a better manner also. In fact, other courses which were not very much relevant to my thesis, like I mean, like she said, there's a lot of clinical courses that are being offered. So the entire experience is really great, and the fact that you have to read your readings in advance, and then you get marks as well for engaging in class, for asking the right questions, for giving the right answers, this sort of thing. It can be a little overwhelming for a student maybe who is not from NLS before. I mean, there were a lot of students who had studied in national universities, and I mean, it's obvious that there's a particular difference in the teaching methods at NLUs and traditional universities. I mean, I wouldn't say all traditional universities, a lot of universities do follow that model. Now I'm doing my PhD at Jindal, so I see that they also design their course in a really innovative manner, which requires you to pre-read and engage in class, all of that. But from where I came, it was a great university, but the teaching methods were traditional. But the only thing that saved me was I was engaged in a lot of co-curricular activities. I was doing moot courts and writing research papers already. So the continuous evaluation method, the reading on your own part, all of that can be a little overwhelming, but with time and with peer support, it is a really interesting experience. It's like the academic journey you want your LLM to be. So it has to be different from, say, an undergraduate course or LLB. LLM has to be that theoretical academic endeavor that you take, and it is supposed to be a little hard on you. So that way, it was really satisfying. I really enjoyed my time at NLS, I would say. And the professors are needless to say, they were amazing. And the readings that they introduced, the courses, the way those things were curated, it was really insightful. And I got to learn a new way in which courses could be taught. So that is something I take with me even when I go to teach in a class, or in the future when I maybe pursue academics.
Correct. And that's the best part of NLSIU also, the professors. They are really helpful also.
Yes.
So, moving further, so what are the career options that opens up once you have completed the post-graduation? So, Amulya?
Yeah, so I think doing a master's gives you a lot more options. Like just just because it's I mean you can also look at it this way, right? You might not have anything directly to gain. Like just having a master's will not in itself ensure that you're placed here or you get to do this or not, but you have nothing to lose. And that 1 year period of time is a lot of buffer time for you to, like, if you want to be in academia, you can also prepare for UGC net and write that exam. Meanwhile, you can also try and publish your research articles, try and prepare for your PhD entrances and all of it. So, and at the same time, like I said, if you're looking for a litigation practice, you can always engage yourself with a senior counsel's chamber and try to do minimal amount of work. And there are some days which we did not have classes, like in my entire 3 trimesters, there was always one day in a week apart from the Saturday and Sunday which we were usually off on. So at least on those days you can like go to the courts, do like minimal work which you can and learn things. So I think having a master's does open up a lot more options to you. Like you can get into academia, and a lot of these quasi-governmental posts prefer people having masters. So that as well. And even with respect to practice, you can always like go ahead, have practice, be a litigator. Also, all of these in-house counsels these days prefer people who have done masters also. Like if you want to go to a company, be their advocate on record or be a legal consultant in a private firm and all of it. I think masters does give you open up to a lot more options for you like that. So I would say like this academia, you can practice, you can be in a private company or people. I've also had batchmates who, did their company secretaries alongside and they're also. So it gives you a lot more options basically, and also gives you more time to prepare for your competitive exams if that's what you want to do, like your civil services, your state service exams, or your judiciary for that matter. And you can also like go try and be a research assistant for a judge, or like be a Supreme Court law clerk and all of it. So you have ample number of opportunities that actually open up for you. So yeah, and it's also a tiebreaker, like when you have somebody with 2 years, when you have two people with 2 years of experience and one has a master's, the natural tendency is to like, okay, prefer a person who is also has a master's. So I think it does give you an edge over the others in certain circumstances, but that doesn't mean that doing a master's alone will help you like, get a placement. You'll also have to do your other ancillary work to it. It's just a beneficiary factor.
Anu, would you like anything to like add to this?
I think she pretty much summed it up. It's exactly that an LLM would it has become sort of entry barrier, like we said, in a lot of career options in government advisories and in PSUs. Like she said, you have to have an LLM to enter. But in a lot of other fields, you don't need an LLM. So it can add on like a 1 year post qualification experience, or it can just maybe help you it can help you to show your skills. Like when we go to a role, when we interview for a role that requires drafting, so they would need to see your research skills. So you have your thesis which has been graded, so you can just show your thesis. Okay, see, that I know how to research and write, so that is something you can rely on me for. So that way it is helpful. Then again, for academics, UGC net, you need to have an LLM. So that is you need an LLM for UGC net. So that is one thing. Another thing is, I think I already mentioned this, in a lot of jobs you require LLM, but also I'd say LLM is also not always a means to an end. Sometimes I have met people, and I myself is one person who really enjoys academics. So when you are doing an LLM, it's itself is a process. You're also learning, because a lot of LLB courses are very practical and experience based and clinical based. So you just read the BERAC, do case laws, you read the head note and you excel in your exams and everything. You have done law firm internships and everything. But sometimes to understand the philosophy of the law, like I'm sure Amulya would be able to expand on this better. When you are arguing in court, if you know the philosophy behind a particular law, you know the history of the thing and why it's written the way it's written, all of this is a part of your LLM journey, much more than it could be a part of your LLB journey. I'm sure some teachers do teach the background of laws in LLB also, but in LLM, like I'm not sure if that course is still happening. Foundations of Private Law, I think it's one of the core courses at LLM. So when I read that, I actually understood why Section 73 of Indian Contract Act is the way it is? What is the philosophy and the theories behind it? What is the logic behind the existence of tort law? So when you are arguing in court as a professional lawyer, or you're making your draftings, you can refer to these things, and that will put you an edge above your competitor or your opponent. Because what a person usually does is they would cite the law and the case, and the philosophy of it you usually see in the Supreme Court or the High Court judgment. But there's no bar in, making your arguments more strong and more concrete. And I think the philosophical backing of law is something that really excites me. I'm still working on it in my PhD, so it's quite obvious that I enjoy this sort of exercise. But it is also, you can just do it and you will see that it reflects in the way you talk to people. I mean, legal conversations when you have in your peer circles, and also in whatever field you choose to be in. I worked in a company for a year. I was placed from NLS itself. So it was the e-discovery company. I was a legal project manager, assistant project manager there. So although that was not something I wanted to do forever, but still that was a career push that I needed at the time. Out of college, you get placed. So you leave college one day, you're working the next day. You're making money, and you also are adding to your experience. And all of this will help you actually later on choose a job that you want, and you can leverage this experience and this what do you call CTC, your CTC you can leverage to get a better job at a better position. So all of this in itself is also LLM in itself is also an experience, and it can lead to a bunch of things also.
Correct. To sum up, basically, if you want, like, if you're doing an LLM, so it will help you on your academics. You have to clear UCG net, or PhD is, of course, important. And then, of course, it also opens a doors for PSU. There are a lot of PSUs for which you need a good CLAT PG rank. And then law firms, in-house counsel, litigation, of course, it will be helpful, somewhat it will be helpful. And then further now, I think for JAG also, they require that you are supposed to give CLAT PG exam. And if you want to be a judge, so that also gives you a raise actually once you are having like dual degree. So that's also helpful.
Yes.
Okay, so
I think just to add on before we move on to the next question, I think apart from looking at it in a way like, okay, what kind of career opportunities it gives you, one thing I would like to say is like the entire course at LLM like got me into thinking a lot of things, like it gets you into the thinking and the reasoning spectrum, because we had to write a lot of response papers and all of it, which is not just summarizing or briefly describing what the article is entirely about. It's more about, okay, you critically think over it. So I think irrespective of what kind of career options it opens up to you, the kind of thinking rigor which you develop in the entire 3 trimesters will definitely help you like flare well wherever you go, like whichever profession you choose to do.
then that's very important when it comes to legal profession. So last 2 questions. So as each of you is in different field of law, so could you briefly share what your current roles, and finally, what advice would you like to give to someone who will be appearing this exam in this year? So I'll start with Anu. So what is the application process, Anu, if someone wants to apply as a young professional at the Department of Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and then also you were an associate, right, at Ministry of Environment, Forest and
Environment.
Change.
Yes.
You can also tell us the process and what is your current role there, and the final advice.
So basically, what you have to do is, they release a lot of vacancies, I think every year or every 2 years, and there's a certain number of requirements that you have to fulfill. And there are certain categories also, depending on the number of years that you have worked. So at MOF, like I was telling you, in the Ministry of Finance, the minimum you need to have an LLM even to apply, or a master's, like for other fields. So I'm a legal consultant there. So what work we do is really top-notch work, I would say. Like you get involved in the legal policies that are being worked at by the government of India. You get to interact with a lot of high-end officials, and you get to work with them. So because my background is legal, so I work in legal and policy more or less. But when you work in a government setup, you also get to learn and work on a lot of other things, beyond law as well. Of course, your core work is legal research and legal drafting, policy making, all of that. But you also get to learn a lot about how the government functions, how laws are passed, how policies are made, and how they are implemented. What are the bottlenecks that the government faces while implementing policies. How do we engage with stakeholders? How do we, engage third parties in order to make our policies more effective? So I think the work I really enjoy it. Before I was at MOEF, there I was working with case laws. It was more of a litigation sort of a thing, but also I got to work in the Environment Protection Act, the amendment that has happened recently in the Jan Vishwas Act. So I got to draft a lot of policies as well, work with the committee that was, drafting that particular rules and act. That was really an experience you cannot get anywhere else, because lawmaking is only happening at the center. So that was really, I mean, I really enjoyed it there. And similar work at MOF, although here there is less case laws and more policy work and research work, but it's still really interesting to engage with that sort of group of people, which are going to be working with the government of India forever. And you get to learn a lot, and you basically get to add a particular flavor to your CV that you will not get anywhere else. As for selection, when they release vacancy, you just have to fill the form. If your CV is good enough, if they feel like it, they will call. If your CV is shortlisted, basically, and it is usually shortlisted if you have an LLM, where LLM is required, and some decent work experience. Then there's a panel of high government officials. They will take your interview, and based on that interview, you will be selected. And then, so that is the process is simple. I think it is many people do not know about these roles. So there are a lot of people who keep working. So when I went to MOEF, I got to know that, there are good roles across all these ministries. So then I moved to MOF. But then it's a relatively simpler process, not very easy to get through, because the people who you're talking to will ask you really difficult questions. And sometimes when emergencies happen, you have to work through Saturdays and Sundays, and you just cannot say no, and you will not be paid overtime, because those people are working basically through the week all the time. So when you get into such a setup, it also, I mean, I wouldn't say that they are overworking us, but once or twice it happens in 1 or 2 months. You have to work through the weekend, and some days you get time off as well. Like, when work is coming, it's coming. And sometimes, I mean, it's just balanced out, I wouldn't say, and it gives you a good work-life balance as well, except for the weekends that you have to work. Generally, it is a good work-life balance. You get to work with nice people, nice work.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Amulya. So, Amulya, in Karnataka, you're practicing in High Court. So, you're practicing under someone, or like it's an independent practice you're doing?
I actually work for a law firm which also has its office in New Delhi, and now they also have an office in Bangalore. So we not really, although we do high courts, we also do a lot of trial courts, and we also do a lot of specialized forums like, KRC or consumer forums and all of it. So I think it's a nice holistic experience for me. So in litigation, one real thing which I like is that there's never the same thing. Like every case is different, every facts are different. There's always some new point of law. You're always searching and looking at it. So I think it's a exposure wherein you're always on your toes. Like there's no relaxation. It's just not very mundane or not very routine. So there's always new things happening. And the best part for about litigation, and why I personally like litigation, is because it's not just the laws. You also get to the reality of the society you're living in. You figure out what is happening to people from different stratas, what are they going through, what kind of issues exist in the society, and also to understand, the general ethos of the holistic society. Like, okay, these are the crimes which are still happening. These are the kind of laws the government is making, and this is how it needs to be implemented. Okay, if it is not being implemented, then what else do you do? I think these kind of questions always like keep you on the go, and there's always a thrill when you have to like go and present your case before a judge, and there are so many circumstances wherein you just don't expect, it just happens. The judge might ask you something which is totally out of the blue, and you'll have to like use your brains on the spot and decide what to do. So one thing I really like about litigation is that you two things. One is that if you flair well, you get to like make a good reputation for yourself. Second is that you're always learning something new, like something new, like always learning something new. Third, if it's a genuine case, you always help somebody out of the misery. So you're kind of helping the society to build. So I think that's to sum up the litigation life.
Yeah.
I
So,
would say it's the most law profession out of all the law professions. Like the most application of legal mind happens, I think, while you are litigating. My
correct.
father is also my father also practices criminal law, so I work with him basically all the time, but I've also dedicatedly worked with him for 6 months. So that experience is remains unmatched, when you go to an office and sit in an air conditioner and sit there and just work on your computer, that's entirely different. And when you have to go and present your case in front of a judge, and you don't know how that person is going to react, there are a lot of factors. I'm sure she would be able to explain it better, but even in those 6 months I could tell that very uncertain but also very exciting, very it I mean, you cannot just not, if you don't feel like going to work, you're probably gonna mess your case up. You have to be on alert all the time when you are litigating. So very exciting field, I'd say.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think litigation no longer is just, application of laws. And, conventionally, I used to at least think, okay, litigation is just like you need to know what the law is, then you need to know what the precedents are. You just go submit it in the court, like, okay, there's already similar facts, similar judgment, and this is supposed to be done in my case too. But I think it's gone a step beyond now because of judicial activism and all of that. Like, especially the Supreme Court litigation, there's so much of policy happening there. Like, even if we say, like, it's all just judicial legislations and not the real policy. But I think my dissertation was on that. My dissertation was basically on Supreme Court's complete power to do justice under Article 142, and I worked on irretrievable breakdown of marriage. So if you look at it this way, it's not a ground for divorce at all under the Hindu Marriage Act. But then Supreme Court is still going ahead and granting divorces under IRB. So it's also one of the things. And very recently, there's a petition in the Supreme Court which has challenged Section 9 of the Citizenship Act. So there's a lot of policy making also which is happening. At least there's so much of litigation work that makes way for a better policy to come in. So I think it's not just the conventional cases anymore. It's also some sort of society engineering process which is happening at the Supreme Court and the High Court level, especially.
So, Amol, a final piece of advice for those who are appearing this year.
So I would just say, like, follow a three-step thing, which is basically I did know your bare acts, because bare acts give you conceptual clarity. So even if you do not know which case, which amendment, you'll at least be able to eliminate something. Second is read judgments thoroughly, at least the more prominent ones. And the constitutional bench judgments, especially, you need to know. And when you read the constitutional bench judgments, you also need to know the majority, minority views, like who said what. That I think is very important. Third is your full length mock tests and revisions. I think they also help you a lot. Like writing a 2 hour full length mock test will help you understand and keep you focused for that entire 2 hours. You also get into a reading habit. So when you come across the actual question paper, your anxiety level also reduces because you're already accustomed to writing papers like that. And solve as many questions as you can. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full mock length itself. Sometimes you might be reading judgments, you'll get bored. So I used to just pick up some judiciary book and solve some MCQs that'll give you conceptual clarity. But I would say please don't get into like secondary reading material like Avatar Singh, Mullah, and all of it. Just know your Bare Act and illustrations, plus judgments and regular mock tests would help you sail through the exam.
Great. Anu?
Yes, pretty much the same thing. I'd say don't go about reading a lot of other things. Only one thing I would like to add is go and read legal editorials from the newspaper. Sometimes your questions are directly those editorials from Indian Express or Indian Express. I think I have noticed quite a few articles have come in the previous year. And first, complete practicing all the previous year questions before going on and solving any other questions, because at least 5 to 7 questions are certain to be repeated. And when I say repeated, I don't mean the exact same question. I mean exact same judgment or exact same concept, because the pattern that they have now, there is very less scope of questions being repeated, but you would know 42nd amendment, this question has been coming. So just go through the key concepts of the 42nd amendment, for instance. That, and the third thing is even if you see the paper and you feel like none of these topics are familiar to me, just be calm, take a deep breath, and like she said, read the questions, and a lot of answers are there in the question paper itself. So that will give you an edge over somebody who just sees ki, oh, this is a labor law question, this is a company law question, like it happened to me, because company law is just something like, weak point, I would say. But if you like keep your foot down, take a deep breath and read, and if you are able to understand English, and if you have a grasp of how laws are written, any law in any field, you will be able to answer at least 50% of those questions, at least.
Great. I'm sure that will be helpful for them. Okay. So, last part of this podcast. So, this will be a rapid fire round. I will be asking 5 questions to know more about you guys. So, should I start? Okay. I'll start with Anu. So, the first question, book or podcast?
Book.
Book. So, any book you would like to recommend?
So actually, I mean, the problem with me is I do not read a lot of non-fiction. I read a lot of fiction. But if I have to say, books by Abhinav Chandrachud are really interesting to read, because he gives a lot of, like, it's a very anecdotal in form. It's like you're reading a story. So for law, I would recommend Dr. Abhinav Chandrachud's books, and otherwise I just read crime fiction. So not a great person to ask.
Okay. So, what you will prefer, work from home or office setup?
Office setup, because work from home makes you very lazy, and lack of a routine, yeah, that doesn't work for me.
So, one legal skill every lawyer should master.
I think research is the key to everything. No matter what field you're working at, you can just switch between legal fields if you are good at research, because eventually if you can go to the origin of the thing, and you know how you can basically deduce how the law has developed, you'll be able to argue, right, uh, debate about it easily. So research is the core skill that every lawyer should have.
Okay. One general advice for law students.
I think one general advice would be, during your law school, like, be completely present. I'm not saying just become a nerd and just keep studying all the time, but participate in a lot of things. Academics is relatively easy, especially for 5 year. You can manage your CGPA one way or another, but participate in things, right? Write blogs, write papers, participate in moot courts. Moot courts are really important. They give you a lot of clarity, but do not just be stuck to academics and judiciary preparation, so to say. Just participate in all sorts of things. That will also help you figure out your long-term career.
Okay. Final question, a lawyer that you look up to.
I think it has to be my father, because I've seen him, before a day before he has to go and cross-examine, a witness. I can see him sitting in the evening and, imagining scenarios, how he's going to trap the witness. And, it, I think, requires the highest amount of critical thinking skills that any profession, I think, would require, and even other professions of the legal field as well. So I think I really look up to him, and I have seen him argue. I have seen him win cases, so I am really inspired by him and I look up to him. Yes.
Great. Now I'll move on to you, Amulya. So the first question, book or podcast?
Prefer books.
Okay. Any book you would like to recommend?
I would like to recommend this book called Discordant Notes. It's basically a book on dissenting opinions in the judgments, and actually like how they are also important. So I think every lawyer should understand that it's not just a majority opinion which you should know, it's also the minority opinion. And sometimes 5 years down the lane, they might make more sense.
Okay. Next question, work from home or office setup?
Quotes, neither.
Okay. So next question, one subject you wish was taught better in law school.
Research methodology.
Okay. Moving on. If not a lawyer, what would you have been?
I think I would have been a civil servant, probably because that involves a lot of policy making and all of that. So, governance is something I really like. So, if not lawyer, maybe that.
Okay, great. Final question, a lawyer that you look up to.
I can't think of a practicing lawyer as such, but then one thing I would really like to say is that I enjoyed and I loved reading judgments written by Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud. I mean, it's good. I mean, I'm pretty sure like he did a good job when he was practicing before the Bombay also. So one real thing I look up to in his judgments is that it's not just a law which it captures, it's also a lot more beyond that. It also has some sort of a reality check on what is happening in the society. So I think I really look up to him in terms of understanding the law and having that ability to connect it with the ground realities of the society.
Great. So that's it. It was a great rapid fire round with you guys. So now finally here we have come to the end of the session, and thank you Anu and Amulya for sharing your strategy, journey and valuable insights with us. It was an absolute pleasure having you guys here, and it was like small NLSIU reunion also. So I hope the insights you have given will benefit the CLAT PG aspirants and provide them clarity on how to go about LLM preparation, they should go for LLM or not, and what are the career options available also. And those who are watching, thank you so much for watching this. Please like, share, and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions from us. So